When I went to see Megalopolis, the film directed by the director who gave us The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, the winner of 5 Oscar statuettes, I expected to see something grand. But I was completely unprepared for what I saw on the screen. The first thought that occurred to me while watching, but when the first emotions of shock subsided, I asked myself the main question: what did Francis Ford Coppola want to tell us in this video? Let's try to figure out what Megalopolis is really about. What illusions and symbols are hidden in this work? Is this a bursting at the seams hallucination of the author or a monumental directorial manifesto? Megalopolis was conceived by Coppola as a truly grandiose project, because according to the author himself, this is his life's work, and what he went to in order to make his film is really impressive. Francis Ford Coppola is one of the few directors who can afford full creative expression thanks to personal finances. Moreover, Coppola often invested in dubious projects that failed miserably in Hollywood and declared bankruptcy several times. And the movie Megalopolis repeats this story in many ways. To cover the film's production budget, he sold his vineyards for $120 million. Such stars as Adam Driver, Giancarlo Esposito, Nathalie Emmanuel, Aubrey Plaza, Shia LaBeouf, Jon Voight, Lawrence Fishburne, and Dustin Hoffman were confirmed for key roles. Now briefly about the plot. By the way, if you haven't watched Megalopolis yet and you're worried about spoilers, then take my word for it. This is the kind of movie that spoilers will not spoil, but rather the opposite. They will make it easier for you to perceive what is happening on the screen. Imagine an alternative reality. A city called Rome is an obvious reference to New York, which was locally affected by some kind of disaster. And our main character is the brilliant architect Caesar Catalina, who is not only talented, but also has a unique ability to stop time.
Time, stop!
His goal is not just to rebuild the city, but to transform it into a new world capital using a unique material called megalon. But, of course, there were some dramatic confrontation. His main opponent is the mayor of the city, Franklin Cicero, and he is ready to do anything, even dirty methods, to maintain power. If Catalina wants to create something similar to a utopia, then Cicero wants to leave everything as it is and urges the townspeople to be more pragmatic. At the center of this struggle is Cicero's daughter Julia, who is trying to reconcile both sides. And to add even more drama, Catalina's cousin Claudius also dreams of gaining control of the city. In the end, Julia and Caesar Catalina fall in love with each other. They have a child, and this becomes a reconciling factor. It's not a particularly complicated plot, but in fact, it's not as important here as the individual statements of key characters and the illustrations of the city itself and the prevailing atmosphere of debauchery and general moral decline. Before proceeding to the analysis of the meaning, I would like to voice the main disadvantage of the picture. The main thing is a kind of misconception, which was either deliberately or accidentally introduced to the audience before the film was released in cinemas. After all, the film was positioned as an epic science fiction drama, which it is not. The whole surrealism of the narrative makes it clear that the film is a typical art house. If for some reason you are not familiar with this term, then I will briefly explain. The word art house comes from the English phrase art house, which literally translates as house of art. It was originally used to refer to cinemas that showed independent films, often with an experimental approach outside the mainstream in commercial filmmaking. Over time, the term art house began to be applied not only to cinemas, but also to films themselves, which are distinguished by non-standard narrative structures, author's vision, and deep themes. Art house cinema is usually aimed at a narrowly trained audience who is interested in cinema as an art form rather than as an entertainment product. Roughly speaking, the creators of an art house are creators who are trying to reinvent the bicycle. Sometimes their creations look like they forgot about the wheels, but they added wings and a tail, and sometimes vice versa. Something invented within the art house becomes a part of mainstream culture. For example, the non-linear narrative structure often used in art house became popular in the mainstream after the success of films such as Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. This technique was typical for experimental films and art house films, but Tarantino adapted it for a wider audience, making it an integral part of modern cinema. Or, for example, absurdity and surrealism, which used to be characteristic only of art house, became popular after the release of projects such as David Lynch's Twin Peaks. If we evaluate Coppola's Megalopolis as an art house film, then within the framework of the genre, it becomes quite an ordinary picture, if this word is applicable to art house at all. But Francis Ford Coppola did not position the film from this point of view, apparently in order not to scare off the mass audience. He wanted to jump into the unknown, which he says more than once in the film through the mouth of his main character. So what is this movie about? And what did Coppola want to tell us? Of course, I can't get into the author's head and say anything with 100% probability, but it's obvious to me that Megalopolis is primarily a film about Coppola himself. In the first half of the film, the phrase goes something like this: Rome is the Colosseum. If the Colosseum falls, Rome will fall. For centuries, the Colosseum has been the heart of entertainment for the Romans and visitors to the city. Those spectacular gladiatorial fights were held here. If we draw an analogy with modern times, the Colosseum is a field of entertainment and cinema in particular. If the Colosseum falls, Rome will fall, cinema will die, and civilization will disappear. And cinema, as we know, has not been able to offer anything fundamentally new lately, and most of the paintings seem to be looking into the past and trying to play on nostalgic feelings. In general, Rome was not chosen by chance because, as everyone knows, Rome, or rather the Roman Empire, is practically an entire civilization that disappeared under the onslaught of internal crises and barbaric invasions. In the center of the story, Caesar Catalina is actually a collective image of the creator, similar to Coppola himself. He can literally work miracles and stop time with a snap of his fingers, just as directors in the best of times could influence the minds of millions. But no one cares, because the city is mired in commerce and debauchery. The most influential person in the most influential capital in the world who owns time can't do anything, can't resist bureaucracy, ignorance, and the power of money. There is Franklin Cicero, the mayor of the city, as the personification of modern bureaucracy and unwillingness to change anything. There is Lady Wow as the personification of modern show business, the press, TV, and everything else.
Listen, bitch. You and I ought to have an understanding. You're on my territory now, and you're gonna play by my rules.
There is Claudius as the personification of the filmmakers of the new wave, absolute mediocrity, and outrage. Hamilton Crass is an old school, flabby and feeble, which is no longer able to withstand modern trends and perhaps no longer understands what is happening around. There are many more analogies to be found in the film, but only the author himself can fully tell about their meaning. And we can only guess about it. Here we see the crisis of the author who can no longer create. After all, at some point, Caesar Catalina loses his ability to stop time. There is also an answer. The opportunity to create is returned to him by his love, Cicero's daughter. She not only criticizes modern society, but also offers an answer to the question of where to look for hope for a better future. The symbol of reconciliation is the child born from the union of Cicero and Caesar's daughter Catalina. After all, children are our future, and realizing which planet we are leaving to them can be the very factor that unites us for the common good. The film is clearly not one of those that is easy to understand from the first viewing, but can we criticize a director who has already achieved everything in cinema? What can you dream about? And in his 80 seconds, he continues to create and experiment, and with his own money? Through his character, Coppola literally tells us that he doesn't care about his place in history. He just wanted to create this strange manifesto. And perhaps that's where his greatness lies, in his freedom from expectations and aspirations to go against the flow.
We are taking our city back!
When we ask these questions, when there's a dialogue about them, that basically is utopia.